So it turns out the Nintendo Switch is too big. Now, let me explain a little bit about that. There was an interesting article, this was a few days ago, from Citigroup, and analysts talked about how the Nintendo Switch is too large for younger kids, and that in 2019, Nintendo should be releasing a Switch Mini. And while that makes sense to the analyst, I'm not really sure if they know how Nintendo would do that, or if that's even possible. In fact, a lot of people have picked up this story. I don't think have really thought about how they would even consider doing that. I think it was a lot of people just kind of talking about the story, specifically on like gaming websites and stuff. They kind of picked it up, explained what they said, and that was kind of it. The closest one I saw that probably got to at least trying to figure it out was the No, where they kind of talked about how they would be able to get the system itself smaller. But I figured we'd go through that. We'd talk about the idea anyway, and really go through how Nintendo would even be able to get this thing any smaller. So the analyst over there pretty much came up with the idea by looking at the audience that Nintendo usually caters to. Obviously, with the 3DS, the 2DS had to come out later on because of the 3D being found to not be very good for a kid's, especially at age under 7, their vision. And so they had to come out with the 2DS and drop the 3D gimmick, but overall, I mean, the Switch is still pretty small as it is now. Maybe not for, say, a 7-year-old or a 6-year-old, but to me, the way Nintendo is marketing the Switch, they have the Switch for the older audience, like myself, like most of you guys, and then they have the 3DS, the 2DS, or the 3DS XL for the kids. Now, that's not to say everyone who owns the 3DS or 3DS XL are kids. I just think Nintendo has that placed perfectly right now and has their audience as kids for that system. Now again, people are playing Pokemon, people have 3DS XLs that are not kids, but the 3DS XL appears to be more durable than the Switch, mostly because it does have a clamshell design that closes, whereas this is a plastic screen that is completely exposed, so if it's dropped, it can be scratched pretty easily by gravel, whereas, like, for example, you're in the driveway and drop it on gravel, whereas something like 3DS XL is clamshelled, it's closed, the outside will get scratched, but the screens will stay relatively good shape even if it is dropped while closed. So, realistically, a Switch Mini makes sense, but right now, they just don't need it. And I think the analyst understands this because they talk about how they wouldn't really need it until 2019 when most of the units have sold to the, I guess they want to say, Nintendo enthusiasts, people who are going to buy the system no matter what, just because they are fans of Nintendo and follow Nintendo off of a cliff if they want to. But I think the analyst has the right year and the right mindset, but I don't think they know why exactly they have the right year, and I'll talk to you guys about that real quick too. So yes, a Switch Mini makes sense. I do also think that if they release a Switch Mini, they should also release something for the more power users, maybe like a Switch XL or a more powerful Switch, just for people who don't mind spending the extra money. The games have to work, though, across all systems. I think that is obvious. I mean, the 3DS XL came out and it was a bigger screen and everything than the new 3DS XL, but for the most part, all the games still played. I know there were like Xenoblade where you needed that new 3DS XL because it needed the extra RAM and the horsepower, but overall, those were very few, the games that needed that, and for the most part, you play them across the board. The cartridges go between 2DS or the new 3DS XL. So anyway, let's talk about this Switch system and how they can make it smaller. So there's a couple of things that are obvious. Now, we have looked inside this system on this channel, and I can tell you right now, the three biggest things right now that are holding the system back from being smaller are the Joy-Cons, the screen, and the battery. So how do we make the battery smaller? Because realistically, looking at this battery, it's pretty small as it is for the capacity. Well, you can make the system's battery smaller, but you have to do a little tweaking to the system itself to get the same battery life that you get now. And this is kind of where the year 2019 argument comes into play, because in 2019, I have pretty much zero doubt that the X2, this is dubbed by Nintendo as an X2. I know we like to call it X2 or P1. The dev board is an X2 is what they call it, so I'm sticking with X2. The X2 should be at least at a consumer level at that point, and I have no doubt that the X2 will find its way into a Switch revision at some point, mostly because the same stuff can all be run across them. They will probably be cheaper because they're smaller, so easier to fabricate on like large pallets, and at that point, there's no reason not to put it in there. It just makes sense overall. The X2 has a lot of benefits over the X1 that's in the Switch now, namely power draw. So the idea here is that the X2 is able to run at the same speed and the same power overall in terms of horsepower as the X1 is now, but at half the power draw. And this is quoted by NVIDIA on their dev board site. You can go take a look. It says it right on there. You can use the X2 to do one of two things. You can either get twice the performance at the same power draw, or you can get the same performance at half the power draw, which would tell me at that point that they can work it in so the X2 will pull half the power it normally does from the battery, which means you need half the battery. And that is, of course, assuming Nintendo wants it to have the same battery life. Maybe they don't care, they want it to be the same size, but hey, throw an extra 3 hours of battery life in there while you're playing Zelda. It's all good. I would be very happy with that myself. But again, if they're going to target the younger kids, maybe like a 6 or 7 year old who doesn't want to carry this big thing around with detachable Joy-Cons, you have to make some other changes other than just the battery. I'm talking about the Joy-Cons themselves. So here's the problem with the Joy-Cons. They are the same width as the entire system. So the system has to stay this same height pretty much the entire way to accommodate this Joy-Con. You cannot make this smaller and keep this Joy-Con the same size. It just would not work. So there's two things they can do. They can shrink the Joy-Cons to a comically small the small size, which would get kind of in that borderline where Futurama was making fun of us with our tiny cell phones swallowing them. They would probably have to put choking hazards on these Joy-Cons if they make them any smaller. So I don't think they would make the Joy-Cons smaller. One, you'd have to buy a whole other set of Joy-Cons for your system. Two, again, it gets dangerous. I mean, they already made the cartridges taste weird to keep kids from eating them. Are we going to get the same thing with Joy-Cons? Because they taste the same right now as your system. Don't ask me how I know that, but they do. So here's what they would have to do. They would have to pretty much eliminate the detachable Joy-Cons and turn it into almost like a mold. Think of like what a Vita looks like almost, where the controls and everything are all one. It's all one piece. Now, there's a couple reasons why that would be a good thing. One, the cost would be less because you don't have to manufacture two separate Joy-Cons that have all the crazy slide, grip, motion, everything going on in here. You definitely wouldn't really need motion controls at that point for the parts that are on there. You can eliminate a lot of pieces from this system at that point, which tells me they could probably come in at a 200 or less amount for the system when it launches. The other thing they may want to consider doing, if they do a Switch Mini, is eliminate the dock, because at that point, you're probably buying it for a kid to use as a handheld device, and realistically, you can buy the dock separately, and if that helps keep the price down, the purchase of a dock is then optional for the consumer. Now, the screen is the other part that would have to be modified in some way, and I think Nintendo could probably shrink it to something like a 5.5 inch, like a 5.5 inch screen that should keep the same aspect ratio and everything, and really, it should work well overall, because if it's for a smaller kid or somebody who just wants a portable system, that would at least make it small enough to where the screen and the system itself is kind of pocketable almost. You could put in your pocket, but not too small to where you don't know what's going on the screen. I do think they should retain the same docking performance where you kind of just drop it in the dock, shows up on your screen. That's kind of the whole point of the Switch. I mean, that's why it's called Switch. If it does not have that docking performance where it shows up on the screen, you might as well just call it something else and just avoid the confusion. The other thing I just talked about was the price. I think this thing comes out, if they do a Switch Mini, at $200, maybe a little less, maybe some weird price of $190. Maybe they try to hit it hard at holiday season that year on Black Friday and then leading up to the holidays at $150, because then it'd be impossible to find, obviously. I think it would be $200 though. I don't think it would be $150. They'd be leaving money on the table. People would buy it for $199.9, no problem. I myself would have been more interested in a handheld device that was maybe better battery life stuff. If they end up doing that, that's fine. I like that I can play it on the TV. I gotta tell you guys, I play this as handheld more than anything right now, and I would have no problem not docking it to my TV. I would still have the same overall experience I do now. So yes, this analyst was actually pretty dead on with his year. For if he knows about the X2 or what it's doing right now, which it's been sent out, people have it. I can tell you now, Nintendo has the dev board and they have to be working on it. They know what's going on with this X2. I'd be shocked if they were not grinding away, burning the midnight oil, looking at this X2, trying to figure out how they can come up with a board revision. Because you can change the shape of this motherboard. This motherboard is not locked in stone. The only thing that's really locked in right now is the Joy-Con size, because it's not going to change. It would be dumb for them to change it. And right now, the screen size. The screen size would have to change. The battery can be changed and altered, like I said, shrunk down. The screen would have to make a drastic change, and the Joy-Cons would have to make either a drastic change to be molded on, or they would shrink it and then introduce two SKUs. It would get confusing. bad idea. So yeah, it's interesting thought right there, interesting topic to talk about, because I think we would all like something like a Switch XL, where they really try to push the power up a little more with that X2 and that extra memory bus that they could then put in there. They could keep the same battery life but get more power. I think that is very enticing to a lot of us, because we all like better performance. As much as we will say graphics don't matter all the time, frame rate I think is one of the most important aspects to a video game. I can go without shiny graphics if the frame rate is constant and good. So realistically, if they can come out with a more powerful system than the X2, I would probably upgrade absolutely. Or if maybe they come out with one that is the same exact power in terms of horsepower, but the battery life is better, I would upgrade to that as well. So let me know what you guys think down below, though. I'm very curious what your thoughts are on the possibility of a Switch Mini. Like I said, I'm all for it, as long as they also do that, and then maybe like an XL. Let me know what you guys think down below. I'm very curious. And also check our Reddit, our subreddit at reddit.com/r/spawnwave, because a lot of stuff's going on over there actually right now. Topics are being discussed and news are being brought up. So if you have news that you want to post there, I'll probably look at it and it might make Newswave. That'd be awesome. Let me know, guys. I will see you next time.